Chapter 11. Connell. Connell hadn't been through Area 3 for more than a fleeting moment by night during his journey to Sky Island. This was his first time seeing the valley in daylight. To be sure, all the highlands bore their own brand of enchantment, but something about this place resonated deeply within Connell's heart. It was not as grim and solemn as Skye. Majestic was the best way to describe it. The mountains were situated in splendour around the valley, with water cascading down jagged rock formations. Connell felt awestruck by the scene. He had forgotten the feeling of seeing sunlight and bright colours after having stayed in Skye so long. Area 3 village was nestled at the foot of the mountains, surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills. The cracked asphalt road leading into the village was nearly invisible under layers of dirt and ash. The small lake shimmered in the light of dawn as villagers bustled about, tending to their daily chores. Connell stopped to admire the peaceful scene before him, taking a deep breath before descending into the valley. Those people had no idea about the extent of the role they'd have to play in global history. They seemed so unremarkable, so common. But if Connell had learned anything in all those years of studying, it was that things were never what they seemed. And somehow, those mountains seemed to hint at a foreboding of their own, signalizing with their might that this was more than a usual village in a common outer area. But what was common about the outer areas anyway? They were formed by the rebellion of the people who fled from those reforms he was partly responsible for when creating the global union. Most of them had been necessary to prevent the collapse and destruction of our world. The geopolitical reform that provided the global union with political autonomy and got rid of every nationalism, the biotechnological reform for sustainability and an end to poverty and climate change. But it was the social reform that had caused the biggest refugee wave. Connell felt a burden, wondering for the 1,000th time if he had wronged the world by creating World 5, a machine programmed with an algorithm to predict the future, with an accuracy that blew every scientist's mind. Connell once more uttered a curse for Manasseh and his crazy ideals he thought would improve the world. He had no other choice but to plant a virus into World 5 back then. He could have impossibly surrendered such power to a madman. As Connell neared the village, people spotted him from far away. He tried to mask his trepidation with a friendly smile, but the conditions of the village instantly got to him. Time in Skye had made him oblivious to the development outside of the island. The poverty, the complete absence of civilization, medical help, or even proper hygiene. The houses here were simpler, dirtier, created rather for practical than decorative purposes, with stoned walls and roofs made of turf and straw. The cattle lived wall to wall with the inhabitants, sometimes even without the benefit of a partition. Unlike on Skye, there was no place for science here, nor education, only plain labour to survive the long winters and famines, and the unexpected raids on the whim of the government. Connell gave the imposing double doors of the Leaders' Hall a determined knock, and then strode in without waiting for permission. The space was rich with a variety of pelts in various sizes and colours, and the faint morning sun struggled to penetrate the few small windows. Arranged around the room were a couple of tables and a fireplace, adorned with antlers emerging from the wall. A massive figure stood in the doorway, dark eyes alert beneath his white eyebrows and bushy moustache. He grabbed one of the straps on the gun and slid it over his shoulder. This kind of shotgun was long outdated in the cities. At the sound of an unexpected visitor, the man spun around and raised his eyebrows. Connell judged him to be close to his own age, perhaps a bit younger, yet he dominated the room with unmistakable authority. This was how Connell had always pictured a Highland chief. Connell cleared his throat and introduced himself. "Sky Island," the man repeated in a slow tone. He hesitated only for a second. "Well, it had been a long journey. My hunting party is waiting, but let me invite you to a quick sip of ale first." He propped the gun up against the wall and made his way to a wooden shelf filled with jars. "My name is Alistair McKeon." His name seemed tailored to him, just like the leather outfit and fur covering his body. They sat down at a long table opposite each other. Connell stared silently at the wooden mug in front of him. It had been 10 years since he last tasted ale. He lifted the mug to his lips and let it linger there for a moment before taking a deep pull. The warm liquid coursed through his body, mellowing out the tension that had built up throughout the day. "So, Connell," Alistair began without detours, "why here, of all places?" Those 3 days it took Connell to walk to Glencoe, the answer to this question was all he had been thinking about. He had played out several scenarios in his mind, the truth even. But the truth would do him no good, he decided. I used to be a scientist and found a home on Skye for several years, but I had a fallout with the leaders there about a moral concept. While he talked, Alasdair did not even as much as flinch. He pierced Connell with a persistent and unnerving stare. Anyway, Connell continued, clearing his throat. Was he really such a bad liar? He didn't even lie. He only left out the truth. And still, it made him anxious. He had spent too much time on Skye. I decided to leave and look for another home, a place to stay, where I can just work, build a life for myself, a simpler life. With every word Connell spoke, he felt the stare of McKeon's cold eyes on him. The stare made him shiver. What moral concept? Alasdair leaned back and watched his opposite from head to toe, not trying to conceal the gesture. About whether one should be able to protect himself and the people he loves by fighting back, or just endure the violence of the government. Bingo. He added the government on purpose, knowing that this was their sore spot. Alasdair's eyes shone with interest. And which side were you on? You see, I haven't always been only a scientist. This time Connell leaned in. I learned how to fight while in college. I know how to shoot, and I would protect what is dear to me at all costs. Alasdair gave no answer. Instead, he left a long, silent pause and just stared at Connell. He was daring him, it seemed. After another slow sip, he said, "So you can shoot?" Connell nodded. "Maybe you'd like me to join in for the hunt." No answer came, just another deliberately slow sip. "You know, a stranger who can shoot is not necessarily a man I will provide with a gun," he said, and leaned in. 2 strangers in 2 days. This has never happened before. So, lucky for you, our hut with the chain is already occupied. 2 strangers. So someone had already come here before him. Someone Manasseh sent. Whoever it was, he lay in chains for now, and it gave Connell a small sense of calm. McKeon stood up, took the shotgun, and went for the exit. "Join us as soon as my wife has fed you. She'll be here any minute. I'll inform her." Alasdair opened the door and threw Connell one last stare. "Maybe you didn't lie to me," he said, "but you didn't tell me the truth either. A man has his secrets. I know this better than any other. But you are not a free man here until you have proven yourself." With this, he left the hall. Connell exhaled and closed his eyes. Only now did he notice the tension that hung in the air. For all he knew, even Alasdair could be Prometheus. He had the guts, that much was sure. But it wasn't guts Connell was looking for. It was the ability to manipulate time. Chapter 12. Aiden. The sub? Aiden heard Sina's voice somewhere in the backdrop of her own thoughts. My mother had mentioned it once. The boy sat opposite her, his long legs crossed, the eyes with dark shadows underneath staring at her with interest. Today, it was he who brought her some food and water. They took turns with the other one whom she met first, the rebel with the blonde hair and the firm nose. No sign of the third one, and still, it was somehow he who occupied her mind. Those pitch-black locks that fell into the expression that stared at her with shock, as if he had expected her here. She shook those thoughts off. 3 days in chains were 3 days too many. She needed to win their trust, infiltrate the village to seek the one this whole mission evolved around. Instead, she wasted away in this cold hut. Those boys who flirted with her at every opportunity began to unnerve her, and it became harder to put on a beguiling smile. She knew the worth of devoted men, so she forced herself to wear this mask a little longer. It was easier with Arthur. Their conversations remained superficial, and he was content with listening to the sound of his own voice. Not Sena. Their name has been whispered here and there for several months now, he continued. What do you know about them? Aiden rubbed her hands against each other, listening. She waited. Waited for the blow of the hammer to rescue her from this pit. A movement against the global union, she replied. Much more proactive than the outer areas. More violent. They follow some kind of religion, I heard. Aiden nervously stuffed a piece of bread into her mouth, chewing, anticipating. This boy with the dark locks reappeared in the back of her mind. Why did he never return? Aiden! She blinked and forced herself to focus. Yes. I was wondering if they follow any religion. Who? The sub. You just told me you've heard of them as well. She shook her head. Yes, right. Well, they do as far as I know. The sub stands for submission to their only god. Monotheistic, which is very rare. What? Monotheistic. Their worldview includes only one god instead of many, and they believe in him with a fear I've never seen before. Sina paused, suddenly lost in thought himself. They talked a lot about religion, the old Gaelic beliefs that the village had accepted, and why the government had abolished every religion long before their birth. Sina showed a strange interest in those matters, and Aiden played along. What else do you think of them? He asked without looking at her. I'm not sure. They follow a cause beyond themselves. Their devotion and peace of mind is something that makes me wonder. I know exactly what you mean. Sina lifted his eyes and stared at her. His stare suddenly pierced her, as if there was a slight hint of madness in his eyes. The same madness she sometimes saw in Manasseh's eyes. But it was quickly gone, and Aiden was not sure if she had only imagined it. Then she heard the voices from afar and closed her eyes in relief. They were coming. Soon, Sina heard it as well, and rose to look out of the window. When he turned, his eyes were wide with shock. Don't forget the mask you're wearing. What is it? She said, trying to sound worried. Global soldiers, he whispered. Chapter 13, John. John was hunched beneath the handle of his plough, pushing it through the dry soil. The crispness of the fall air lingered in the fading evening light. For 3 days, his friends had blatantly avoided him. He was hurt more by their indifference than by any disapproval they may have expressed. The way they acted as if he wasn't there felt like a stab in the heart. Should he have made another decision back then? Should he have promised the inevitable? Another stranger had arrived at the village yesterday morning, and it caused him even more headache. As he lifted his gaze, 3 bright blue military trucks drove along the asphalt road. The emblem of the Global Peace Army was embossed on each door. His heart began to slam against his chest like a drum. Was Aiden in danger? He did not know. Those future memories were hard to piece together. They were like a puzzle that showed a distorted image he did not always understand. Movement began on the field. John abandoned the plough when he caught sight of Margaret in the corner of his eye. Where's Sina? Her hands trembled as she looked around in panic. I think I know, John murmured, looking at the hut that stood offside the village. I'll go and get him, all right? He put a hand on her arm to calm her down. Would you look out for my grandfather? She nodded, whispering, Please, hurry! John's heart raced as he sprinted away. In the distance, dozens of global soldiers emerged from the trucks. They wore black shells that covered their whole bodies like armor, their faces illuminated by blue helmets with computer-like eyewear. All of them wore weapons. John ran faster. Chapter 14. Arthur. Arthur had been forbidden from going on the hunt for the past 3 days. Instead, his father expected him to sit idly in the hall and ponder over his recent actions. Even the stranger had gone out to the hunt twice now. Thankfully, his mother would allow him several hours outside if Alasdair was not around. This gave him the opportunity to take care of Aiden once in a while, without sneaking out into the night. The hall was shrouded in darkness, and Arthur was growing impatient. He had been here for what felt like an eternity, waiting for his mother to get home so he would be able to plead with her for a few extra hours of freedom outside these walls. His anger towards John had subsided quickly, especially since John had stayed away from the hut. But why had he refused to make the promise? Did he expect that things would fall together, just like that? Arthur missed his friend. But he wouldn't make the first step. It was John who had to apologize. The double doors flew open, bringing with it a tidal wave of light and sound. A battalion of soldiers flooded the hall, their rifles drawn and ready. Arthur felt as though the large room had suddenly shrunk. He didn't have time to react before he was grasped by 2 burly arms and searched. Arthur's thoughts rattled. Global soldiers. Here. One of them took off the helmet and eyewear. His face was slightly wrinkled. His eyes were deep and dark, like 2 obsidian pools, and thick brown hair was combed back in disarray. Has someone entered your area in the past days? A girl? Arthur suppressed every reaction, no matter how slight, and shook his head. The attacker hit him with a closed fist, hard and fast. He felt the first punch land in his gut and the second reverberate against his shin. The third flew into his face, shattering his lip and sending a gush of warm blood down his chin. "Stop lying, boy!" Arthur hesitated, expecting more blows to hit him even harder now, but he would not cave. "And may I ask why a girl is of such interest to you?" A voice echoed from the door, Alastair's voice. Arthur felt a wave of relief, then dread. His father had sworn to do anything to save the village, and Arthur knew he would sacrifice Aiden to fulfill his promise. Arthur saw no way to stop him. "This is none of your damn business," the soldier replied, "but if you must know, she fled the city without permission. I thought the amendment of the free will allows every citizen to leave and go as they please." "Yes, as long as they're of age." So Aiden was under 21, and this bastard of an overseer had probably filed a complaint or a search warrant because he wanted her back in his claws. A cold shiver ran down Arthur's spine. He imagined how they would lead her away, how she'd return to the hands of this monster. Please, don't. Everything inside of him pleaded while he tried to pull away from the strong grip that held him. His father gave no answer, so the soldier pressed. "Where is she? And I won't be asking twice." Another pause. "Please." Arthur longed to catch his father's eye and subtly shake his head in disagreement, but he was too scared to draw attention to himself. Finally, Alastair said, "We haven't had any strangers in Area 3 in years." Arthur closed his eyes. It was the first time he had underestimated his father. The soldier screamed while he walked towards Alastair, hand raising a weapon. "I will turn this whole village upside down. How dare you defy me, you pig!" Arthur feared that any second a shot would reverberate around the walls. He yanked at his captor's grip, but was powerless, earning yet another blow. His father still had a shotgun around his belt, and with a quick movement, he snatched it while a figure stormed in from behind and hit the approaching soldier with the shaft of a weapon so hard that he collapsed on the ground. From here on, chaos broke out. The soldiers stormed towards the exit while Arthur kicked one of his captors and bit the other. Both instinctively spun away. With their distraction, Arthur leapt away and sprinted down the corridor like an animal escaped from its cage. As he ran, he realized that the person who had come in earlier was Connell, the stranger who had arrived only days before. "You cannot kill any one of them!" Connell yelled while they fought. "Killing a soldier makes you a terrorist. This would be the end for Area 3. Alastair nodded. While he prepared to fight back the wave of soldiers that streamed towards him, he quickly handed Connell a set of keys. "Get her out of here," he whispered. Arthur had now closed in on his father, and while Connell disappeared, he knew that they stood no chance against dozens of highly trained soldiers with high-tech weapons. Chapter 15. Aiden. The door of the shack slammed open, and the boy with dark, curly hair peered between Aiden and Sina as they paced around the worn-down planks of wood. Sina rushed towards him. "What's happening out there?" "Soldiers." John's voice was strangely calm. "You need to get your mother." Sina hesitated. "They're looking for me, aren't they?" Aiden's voice sounded scared, and she congratulated herself for that. "I'm not sure. I can't just leave her here. They might come any minute, and then what?" "Don't worry. We'll have the key soon. I'll get her out of here." John gently placed his palm on Sina's shoulder. "Everything will turn out well. Just make sure your mother and my grandfather are safe, okay?" Sina stood silently, his eyes searching John's face, then gave him a brief nod before turning and leaving, his footsteps echoing outside. What did he mean by that? He sounded so confident, as if somehow knowing that this attack could do no harm. This was the first time she was alone with John, and Aiden could feel the unmistakable tension. She was comfortable wearing her facade around others, but with John, it felt like he saw right through it, as if lying to him was pointless, even ridiculous. John's gaze never left her when a commotion started outside, voices shouting, feet running, yet he remained unfazed, his steel-grey eyes kept fixated on her. The closer those voices came, the more it seemed like time slowed down. Her heart thudded frantically against her ribcage. Why? She was not afraid of the attack. But those eyes somehow made her palms sweaty and her pulse quicken. Slowly, as if in a dream, the door flew open and 4 soldiers streamed in, one after another. John anticipated their every move before it even happened, it seemed, his body moving like a well-oiled machine. His fist connected with the first man's jaw, sending him careening into the wall. The second tried to come at him from behind, but John sidestepped and delivered a swift kick to his stomach. The third and fourth were no match for John's lightning reflexes, and they fell just as easily. It only took seconds. Aiden could not help but let her shock appear all over her face. How did he do this? Was he the spy Manasseh had mentioned? 2 more soldiers stormed in, and Aiden instinctively sprang into action. Heavily armoured, they charged towards her, their exoskeletons powered and enhanced by AI. With a calculated combination of feints, dodges, and deft strikes to weak spots in the armours, she evaded their motions. But she had forgotten about the chain. As she lunged, a sharp tug on her leg sent her stumbling backward. Her head smacked against the hardwood floor with a sickening thud. John had overpowered one of them, sending him to the ground in a heap, but the second soldier was already charging forward, raising his rifle with an angry roar that echoed off the walls. Aiden's ears were still ringing from the previous hit as she desperately scrambled for cover. Suddenly, she felt her ankle free from the metal. The stranger standing over her had a grey beard and dark eyes. His hand grasped the soldier's helmet firmly as he yanked it off, tearing away any protection the faceless man had. With no hesitation, he bent his arm back and threw a punch at the soldier's face, sending him tumbling down to his fate. When the stranger offered Aiden his hand to get her up, he studied her, as if trying to determine who she was. He did not look like he belonged here, although all the signs were there, the old scar on the back of his right hand, the shabby clothes. But what was it about him that made Aiden wonder? Connell? John's voice came in between heavy breaths. The man nodded. You need to get her to safety, he said, but Aiden interrupted. I'll surrender. I cannot let them destroy the village. They won't, John said. How influential is this man looking for you? Connell asked. I'm not sure. I don't think very. Then we must take the chances and surrender. They'll turn the village upside down, but as long as they don't find you, they won't have any leverage to do harm. They don't need leverage, John said, pulled himself together, and continued to Aiden. Take some blankets in case we need to spend the night. To Connell, I'll take care of her while you make sure the McKeons behave. Connell nodded. The soldiers must have overwhelmed them by now. They've no other choice. With this, they parted ways. Neither of them noticed when Aiden tucked a knife she had stolen from one of the soldiers into her pocket. Something was wrong with John, and she needed to find out what. Somehow the thought of being alone with him the whole night scared her, and nothing had scared her for a long time. Chapter 16. Connell. Connell yearned for more time to think, but the path that led him back to the village was brief. He couldn't get this girl out of his mind. The way she fought with skill and precision. The way she held herself. No hint of fear. Who was she? And why was the government looking for her? She claimed her persecutor had no power, but Connell suspected she was either lying or simply clueless. In fact, he suspected this man was Manasseh. And if so, he would come back soon. No matter how hard Connell tried to avoid the thought, it kept coming back to him. She is Prometheus. She was a stranger, but was it a simple coincidence that she stumbled into Area 3 right now? This girl reminded him of his daughter. His heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice as he tried to push away the painful thought. They just had to get through this night with no major incidents. Maybe the army would leave. Connell felt a chill in the air and took a deep breath as 2 soldiers jogged towards him. Before he could react, they seized hold of his arms, dragging him into the middle of the village where most of the inhabitants have been brought. Only several elders were amongst them. Life expectancy was low in these parts of the world. Anxious parents were surrounded by desperate children, some as young as 5. Clutched hands tugged at hems, while muffled sobs and whimpers echoed in the air. Alistair McKeon remained steadfast with a bruised eye and several other marks on his face, while his son Arthur stood beside him, bleeding from the mouth. The soldiers thundered through the village, kicking down doors and searching each house. Dishes smashed against walls, and screams of terror echoed through the streets. Connell had seen his share of suffering, but it had been a long time since he felt so acutely helpless in the face of the government's tyranny. He remembered the night he had to flee the city, broken, betrayed, helpless. His life's accomplishments smashed into pieces. Human dignity seemed of no importance out here. It was as if the people turned into monsters, once given power over others, without having to fear consequences. Can't you see it, Manasseh? Is this cruelty your idea of human progress? But maybe it was exactly this power that had corrupted him. The sounds of screams and bones cracking filled the dump, and Connell prayed that nothing worse would happen here tonight. A soldier kicked his leg out from under him, and he fell to his knees in agony. "Where have you been?" he barked. It was the blonde officer he had knocked down in the hall. When he recognized him, he could not suppress a cunning smile and earned a hard slap on the cheek in return. "Answer, bastard!" "Kids sometimes play in the abandoned hut at the edge. I went to check for them." The soldier raised an eyebrow. "So? I just met several of your men and kicked their asses pretty good. No big deal." Those words came out with a smile and a warm sense of satisfaction. Another blow hit his head, this time harder, but it had still been worth it. "Hughes! Torres! Go check the hut and the surroundings. See if anyone fled or if there are any casualties. Keep searching." With this, he left to torment others. "If we survive this," a familiar voice whispered, and Connell turned to Alasdair next to him. "You have my permission to stay." For the first time, Connell caught a smile cross McKeon's face. Chapter 17, Aiden. Crouching among the shadows, Aiden slipped on a set of earpieces. The thick darkness cloaked her as she moved. She had excused herself on the pretext of emptying the bladder and constantly looked back to make sure she was out of earshot. Manasseh's voice crackled on the other end. "So? It's done," she whispered. "You can summon them back." "Good." A pause. "Anything else?" Aiden hesitated. "No. I'll need more information, but now that they trust me, I'll get it." "I know you won't disappoint me." She closed her eyes at those words and took a deep breath. "I won't," she thought. "At least not for now." Manasseh cleared his throat. "Keep in touch." He vanished, and Aiden allowed herself several moments to think before she returned to John. John. Her heart raced in her chest as she thought of him. She gripped the handle of the stolen dagger tucked beneath her shirt, providing her with a fragile sense of safety. John looked up as she approached, and a lost smile crossed his face. It made him look fragile. "Who are you, John?" The knife still safely at her back, she took a seat in the grass and wrapped herself up in one of the blankets. Their faces were illuminated by the faint glimmer of moonlight as they looked at each other. Even though it was freezing cold, they did not dare to light a fire. Soon, the army trucks would leave. Until then, she needed to find out more. "Where did you learn to fight this way?" "I should ask you the same thing," he replied, winking. If he really was the spy, he wouldn't know about her identity. This was the agreement. An agent's true identity, something most valuable to him, was only revealed when he became a traitor. "We all have our secrets," he added. His voice carried a hint of resolve while he brushed away the dark locks from his face. He had a strong jawline, high cheekbones, and eyes that shone like moonlight reflecting on still water. His body was muscular. It had to be. The way he had overtaken those soldiers. He had to be the spy. Unless... Aiden paused, her hands trembling. Could he be the one she had been searching for all along? She took a deep breath and steeled herself, knowing that she had to stay in character. Brushing away strands of red hair, she closed in on him. "Tell me yours." John turned to face her, searching her expression thoroughly. "I know things," he whispered. "Like what?" He paused. "Like the fact that you won't forgive your parents for abandoning you to the raising centers." He dropped this truth on her like a bomb, and it tore her into pieces. She instinctively jerked back, eyes wide, staring at the man who just had revealed her darkest demon. How? Was it just a trick? Parents abandoned countless children to the centers in the dawn of the social reform. Breathe. It's just a coincidence. Aiden shrugged. Lucky guess. But John watched her with those sharp eyes that made her heart leap, her gut tighten, and her breath heavy. Nobody had ever looked at her this way. "You hate the global union and everything it represents because you blame them." Every single word felt like an arrow shooting through her heart. Could this be more than a guess? The way he spoke, the way he said those words, it felt as if he truly knew. He closed in on her, so close that she could feel his breath on her skin. Her heart raced while she gripped the handle of the knife at her back, her hands under the blanket, hidden from his eyes. "Who are you?" Slowly he whispered, "You came here." While he talked, he pushed his hand tenderly under her shirt, closing it around that grip, and taking the knife slowly from her hand. "To kill me." Everything inside Aiden trembled with the sensation of his nearness. The hands of fate pulled at her, dragging her into the abyss she was suddenly unable to withstand. Her lips touched his with a thrill of a universe imploding and exploding again. She pulled him closer, and he intensified the kiss like something he had longed for in a long time. As she was about to abandon herself in his embrace, he stopped and pulled away. "I'm sorry," he said. She narrowed her eyes. "What for?" He drew his hand through his hair, getting up. "Things get mixed up in my head. Past, present, future. I've kissed you so many times that I keep forgetting that you don't know me at all." Nothing he said made sense. She got up now, confused. "Why did you say all these things about me?" "Because they're true." "You don't know. Look me in the eye and say I'm wrong." She met his gaze and was entranced by his deep grey eyes. It felt like he could see right through her. She tried to shake away the thought. Even if he knew, he had an agenda. Everyone did. What did he want? Was he about to destroy her plans? Everything she had worked for her entire life. She closed in on him, lips pressed. "You know nothing about me," she hissed. "But that's where you're wrong," he replied. "I'm the only one who really knows you." She turned away, but he pressed on. "I know you hate the sound of people chewing loudly. You have to sleep on the left side of the bed, and there's no way of talking to you in the morning before you get your coffee." He smiled, as if enveloped in a memory. "You hate neck massages and large groups of people, and you love the sound of leaves rustling in the wind." Aiden stood rooted to the spot, her eyes wide with shock as she listened to his words. She felt a chill permeate her body and could not articulate the emotion that crawled up her spine. Her legs trembled as reality set in. Nobody knew these things about her. Except for John. How was it possible? "I know loving you will cost me everything," he said, as tears glistened in his eyes. "But I'll still choose you. Every single time." She grabbed him by the collar and tugged him close. His lips were like silk against hers, and she could feel them part as her hands found their way into his soft hair. She slid her body against his and felt the warmth of his torso beneath her fingertips. He pulled away, shaking his head. "No, Aiden, this is not the—" But he didn't finish his sentence before she leaned in and kissed him again. He tried to pull away. "We shouldn't—" "Shut up," she said as she unbuttoned her shirt and drew John closer to her. He gave in, moving with practiced ease, sure of every movement as if it happened for 1,000th time. Aiden felt a strange combination of safety and danger that she thirsted for. She felt seen, understood, and loved for the first time in her life.
You've made it! This is the place to unlock your exclusive second reading bonus, early concept art of the main characters and places. Go to dfwink.com/character-sketches to unlock the bonus, which will help you visualize the characters as I see them in my head.